Welcome to my stroll. Today is December 22nd, 2025. Just before it was possible to see the sun for like, I don't know, just very briefly, and it felt like this was the first time in 3 weeks or so that the sun was out. This December was very, very dark and very gray and very cloudy. Many days where we had a lot of like thick and dense fog, where it was only possible to see a couple of meters ahead. Yes, no snow, as you can see. The temperatures are usually hovering slightly above the freezing point, so it's cold, but it's not freezingly cold. Yes, it's like a prolonged autumn. I wanted to talk about modernity today. In the past 2 years or so, I've read more books from historians and trying to, in a sense, also get a sense for the kind of radicality of the revolutions that took place during, in German it's the Neuzeit, the new time. In English it's modernity, so in the past 500 years. Because I think we are always, as human beings, we are in this condition of kind of fallenness to our environment, which means, in a sense, we are getting accustomed very quickly to like what's going on. And we accept, that we, for example, we buy industrialized food from the supermarket. We use smartphones and computers with a kind of, and we do not inquire into this usage. It's just, part of everyday life. And we are using all these tools often in a kind of inert relationship. Which is why Heidegger, was able to just make the diagnosis that perhaps, we are not in a free relationship to technology. We are driven. We are driven forward by the progress that is created by science and technology in their interlinkage. And there's, in a sense, this is like a force that is challenging us, is also creating this peculiar thing world, which Heidegger then characterized with these names, the Gestell, the enframing, the standing reserve. And that includes, the human being, which is also becoming a human resource, a worker, a cog in the machine. And there's a more and more kind of inert relationship to nature and to our thing world. So I read some historians who really tried to also show how really amazing with also kind of a more like it's not necessarily a wondrous amazement, but it's like wow, like the just everything has changed. let's say from 500 years ago to today. We are in a totally different, element, a totally different worldview. There are really like these, the scientific revolution, the industrial revolutions, also the political revolutions. They were so, in a sense, thorough and that they just, everything was turned on its head. And suddenly we are in this element, where, for example, Nietzsche could declare that God is dead. It is really a new time and a new world, a new element, a new dimension in which we are finding ourselves into, and it's an element in which it seems like we've suffered a kind of loss of agency, most of us. Because, and let's be honest, who of us really is understanding how, technical tools are really working? It's like when I am even, considering the smartphone with which I am recording right now, it's like, I don't know, where this was made, how it was made, kind of what rare earths and what parts, had to be, gathered in order to create this tool. I don't know exactly, how maybe the uploading works, how, the satellite communication works, what kind of physics is necessary in order to do this, both, let's say, in terms of hardware and in terms of software. And let's be honest, I mean, who does really have a complete understanding of this? And then, there's even, there's the problem, that these tools, we don't know, with what purpose, they were created and designed. Just, thinking of the algorithms and how people are, developing a kind of, brain rot, and people are becoming very irritable and emotional when they are using too much of some of the apps, that are designed for the smartphone. So there's a high degree of unfreedom, in respect to these tools. But furthermore, there's also a high degree of unfreedom when it comes to, let's say, for example, just, who of us really does understand, the scientific revolutions? Like, for example, the kind of things, that Newton did, that Leibniz did, let's say the carving out of the mathematical project of the world by Galilei, and what impact that has, on reality, and then how we are envisaging a kind of metaphysical theory of everything, a mathematical formula that is holding together, all, let's say, levels of reality. And that we are really in pursuit of such a, let's say, metaphysical ground formula. And how it is also, how it makes sense, once, that mathematical project of the world, in a sense, was incepted, that now what the metaphysical tradition has known as a ground for beings now had to be let's say just something, with mathematical properties, a mathematical formula itself. And all of this, in a sense, is we could become, in a sense, archaeologists of our tradition. And in a sense, this is also part of the necessity of thinking today, so we could understand really what changes in the, let's say, in the relation to being, to nature, to time, to reality, to knowledge, just in, so we could make sense, in all of, like, what's going on here. Why is the modern world as it is today? And I mean, that's a more, let's say, reflective attitude compared to, let's say, one where one is just enabled to, with let's say, the teaching of certain skills and techniques. So one becomes, like, let's say, a good functionary, a good managerial cog in the system, which is also fine and necessary in a sense, that we can steer all of this. But it is good if one has an understanding just of the scope of what has occurred here, of what has happened here. And again, how to harken back a bit to the beginning of my stroll, how radical really the revolutions were. And how radical, in a sense, also this Europeanization of the earth is. How now the entire earth is, in a sense, forced and coerced into a dialogue with the Western metaphysical tradition, which again we do not want to acknowledge this, that science and technology are through and through, to their root, are in a sense, metaphysical in their, let's say, in their essence. But this is often, not acknowledged, because we keep believing that science and technology are, in a sense, neutral and objective, while in truth they are not. I mean, it's a very specific, it comes out of a specific tradition with specific necessities, and it is, these tools, and Heidegger shows this, they are creating a certain, just a certain world, a certain kind of worlding as well, a kind of just there's not like a nature as such. The practices and the knowledge that, let's say, dominates how we conduct ourselves in the polis, in the community, that then also in a sense determines how world shows itself to us. And that there can be different modalities of this, worlding, world creating, world building, being in the world. And Heidegger, like the late Heidegger, shows also how language and art and poetry, may point to a different way of world building, of being in the world. Of living on the earth, as the mortals that we truly are, together, with, let's say, divine beings, divinities. And as Hölderlin said, these gods are now in flight and sparing us. And that's something, in the midst of technicity, I mean, that's something, in this flight or withdrawal sense, of community, of being, that we can only experience, in the midst of this reality of progressing science and technology. In the midst of this, we can also, we can also experience the need for a kind of, we can receive hints of this, let's say, other way of building a world, a kind of other inception of thinking, where it's not about, now finding or achieving a new, let's say, metaphysical ground, but it's about letting things be, letting the principle of all things just freely sway, without any further presupposition, and then acknowledging it in its character of, in its no thingness, in the trait of its no thingness, and also then in the trait of its absconding, of its fleetingness, and so on. And then we may be able again to dwell upon the earth in a more fitting, in a more beseeming manner. We may we may relinquish the element, of the Homo economicus, the kind of, the functionary, the economic human being, the worker, to the Homo humanus, the truly human. But it is, it is for in order to that, in a sense, we have to live up to, we have to acknowledge again what really has happened here, and we have to also, in a sense, come to terms, really, also with the power we were gifted, through the scientific and technological revolutions. We are not at all, in my opinion, really. Again, we are not really aware, and not really, most of us are not, we are just using these things for our own pleasure, while in reality they call for, like a thorough individuation of us. So we are really, we are ready, to use these tools for something like the greater good, and not keeping our, like, not disclosing our, like, the worst aspects of our humanity through these tools, because these tools, they ultimately they enable such a levels of control over other human beings and over nature, in, let's say, the enframing of the standing reserve about other beings, that we also need to, we have to, become adults and become, kind of live up to the seriousness and the kind of what's going on here, I mean the project of the Enlightenment, was that there was really a realization, I think, in people like Kant or Hegel, that we really need to learn to think for ourselves. We really need to train, let's say, the faculty of our reason. So, we may be able to handle all of these technical things in a responsible way. In a way, it's fitting for nature. And this is very difficult. And I mean, beyond that, even, then there's, and then again, after probably we have acknowledged this, then it's also about, to acknowledge also the kind of dimension, the uncanniness, the nihilism that people like, Nietzsche and Heidegger and Dostoevsky spoke about. And because, there is something, that science and progress just cannot address. This is what Heidegger tried to emphasize with his, this lecture course, where he said that the sciences don't think. They can't think. And that's not a kind of, it shouldn't be like a derogatory statement. It's more like just a factual statement about the scope of scientific knowledge. And that philosophical knowledge is about the knowledge of principles. It's about the trait of, the kind of connectedness, fittedness of human awareness to reality in this twofoldness of beings and being, which is only something that the human being has. And today we are even under the threat to lose that kind of awareness when we perhaps, when we think, that machines can also do the same thing. But I firmly believe that machines will not be able to do that. Like what is, there's just something that is, really distinguishing the human being from all other beings, including animals, including, let's say, machine beings. And so there's a lot to learn and to realize for us as human beings. So modernity is, and then that's also what I want to kind of say. Modernity, and it's, whenever now a kind of industrial revolution is coming along, and this has happened before, they also produce, a great deal of, human misery, just because people are getting unemployed. And now there's this, a lot of people talk about the transition to a multipolar reality or world, where the distribution of power will be, not in the hands of one country, the US before, but now shared amongst many countries, and that will inevitably produce more conflict among states, which in some sense, in some sense that's all true, although I also believe that in some sense there is, a globalized, Europeanized world, because every country is science and technology are really what's driving modernity. That's what I believe. It's not about values, although these things, they, of course, they have certain effects on, let's say, history. But the kind of, let's say, the kind of, let's say, epochality of that Heidegger talks about, the kind of Seinsgeschick, I think, that is really driven by science and technology. And they are, as I said, thoroughly metaphysical. And so in the sense, again, I agree with Heidegger that the entire world is now living in this Europeanized reality, and it is a kind of, you know, a kind of one world. There is not and I mean there are certain, you know, countries which, you know, we could still consider pre-modern. You know, some countries we may consider post-modern. But I mean, I think that these, you know, elements will eventually be swallowed up by modernity. It's just for countries which are still pre-modern, I think they will have to engage in a dialogue, and they will, you know, just what European thinkers, you know, also did for the past, I don't know, 500 years. It's you know, coming to terms with what's going on here. I mean, that's I would say after Kant. I mean, that's really what, you know. There was kind of an inception of this element, and then it's more like with Kant, and then later Nietzsche. You know, then it's more like, oh, what's going on here? Like really coming to terms with this process, and in a sense, you know, making sense of what's going on intellectually and philosophically. And I think the pre-modern world, you know, which is sometimes still, you know, rooted in a kind of metaphysical religious tradition and worldview. I mean, they will have to come to terms with this, and this may, you know, be a very this was often a very ugly process in the West, and it may, you know, secularization was by no means, you know, it was not a smooth process. This may also be a difficult process for cultures which are still pre-modern. And then post-modernity is, the way I see it, I mean, there's this great emphasis on you know, the analysis of structures, especially power structures, and often then, you know, the kind of unconscious, you know, all social, you know, all the unspoken forces which are driving the human being, unconscious motives, structural, historical, you know, I don't know how to call them, just forces. And while, you know, reading the tradition and analyzing, deconstructing the tradition through the lens of power, I mean, it's fine, but I think we have done this. We've done this way too much, and then there's often also, as far as I can see, then there's often, sometimes, you know, there's then, you know, what then is the human being? That's kind of open. Because then if we are just the product of our, of our, you know, maybe of our milieu, of our history, of our tradition, and there's kind of a loss of individuality, but then at the same time, there's like this overemphasis on individuality, and that it's kind of, you know, it's kind of free now of all traditions, and it's in a sense, it has emancipated itself from it, but then at the same time it's still deeply grounded in it, and it's all a bit messy as far as I can see. And you know what, Heidegger, you know, these thinkers, you know, that you know, use the method of deconstruction, you know, what Heidegger really intended with it was more to show, you know, how there's a principle of principles governing its, let's say, revealing itself, you know. But being reveals itself, shows itself through, you know, the great thinkers of our tradition, but they themselves could not acknowledge that kind of, let's say, that sheer principle of being itself, that you know, no thingness as such. they could not acknowledge it, and they had to make sense of it metaphysically. And then Hegel and Heidegger, I would say, I mean, these are attempts, to think of being in a kind of presuppositionless manner, both in their, in their very different ways, of attempting this. And that could be, that way of thinking, I think it points to a really a new way of also, being in the world, as I have said before. And if this is realized, this new element, through, let's say, recovering, all these hidden depths of language, of poetry, the kind of, I don't know, the kind of hidden ancientness, then, we may, be able to prepare, at least, because we are still, we're still very much in the midst of progress, and it's unfolding, which may go on for a couple of hundreds of more years. We may be able to prepare a new element, a new kind of, world building, a new kind of being in the world, dwelling in the world. There's a nice old English word of wohning in the world, which is etymologically related to the German wohnen, which means just to live or dwell, reside. And then maybe we can call this maybe we can call this this a genuine, a true wohning in the world. It's a word that's still very much alive in Old English. And there we would also, we could acknowledge also the differentness of all other, other languages, other traditions, other attempts, of being in the world, and acknowledge, in a sense, the inexhaustible wealth and richness of all of our traditions. In a sense, because we are all sharing the same origin, but of course this this same origin showed itself differently to all the different peoples of the world, to all the different ages and epochs of the world, and then to all the different thinkers of the world. And every just philosophy is just the kind of dedicated knowledge to hold open an access to this world and show then ways of practices and just ways and so that other human beings can also learn just to hold themselves in relation to these principles, and then also attain the kind of measuredness, the kind of peace, the kind of let's say the kind of scholaicness from the Greek schole, the kind of the kind of rest, the kind of tranquility that only the genuine engagement with a principle can afford. Yes. I think that's all I wanted to say. So with that, whoever has made it through this stroll, my hand is already very cold. But so I will have to stop in a bit. I think this will be my last video for this year. Everyone who has listened to this, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and many blessings, a Happy New Year, wherever you are, and yeah, all the best. And I hope you hope all whatever you wish for the new year may come true. I also hope I wish everybody also some peace of mind and some freedom. There's like I would say this like these times, certainly in a kind of geopolitical sense, these are some of, I think this is like the most conflict ridden time at least since I have been alive. I thought until 3 years ago that a conflict, another war, really a big war in Europe is impossible. And I often think about and kind of pray for everybody who has is affected by this, by all the either I don't know, physically, psychologically, economically. These times are just very, very unstable, and it's hard to foresee and predict what is going on. There's also then there's the kind of the AI and robotics revolution is pending and looming, and also there may be great socioeconomic upheavals. And there's also I feel like there's just more violence than before. People are just more. There's just a kind of there's a feeling in the air, and people are. There's just more. More people are just unwell, I guess, and many conflicts and many souls who have passed away before their time, I guess. Guess everybody knows that there are many other conflicts in the world, and yeah, so I can only wish peace of mind, peace of the soul, and but all of this, only in evil they often then also shows itself, the greatness of humanity, and the really the also what good the human being can achieve, and the kind of good that only also the human being is capable of doing and accomplishing and achieving. And times of this are also always a great time, I think, for diagnosing and for learning of how so tragic times often provide more opportunities for realizations, for insights, for waking up to the really what the human being really is, and what the good is, what peace is, what conflict is, what war is. It may be a more fertile time for philosophical interrogation, for questioning, and yeah. So with that, happy holidays and all the best to you and your families, and goodbye.